Welcome back to the Metropolitan Culture Corner. This month we interview filmmaker, author, and creative consultant Steve Balderson. His visually stunning films have been screened at film festivals all over the world, including Cannes and others. Roger Ebert, who is one of the mythical film critics of the history of American cinema, gave Balderson's film Firecracker a special jury award on his annual Best Films of the Year list, and since then Balderson has not stopped. He has made a name for himself on the international film scene. He is ranked in the top 50 most influential gay and lesbian directors by IMDB. And in addition to his prolific catalog of work, he's also the author of several books. He is a voiceover artist. He hosts guests on his Filmmaking Confidental podcast. He has been a guest lecturer at the University of California, UCLA, Los Angeles. He has also contributed to industry publications such as the Advocate and MovieMaker magazines. As with many of our guests on this series, I do not know when this guy sleeps, but I admire his work ethic, his drive, his sense of fun, his desire to always explore new things. You can see it in his work. He's constantly reinventing himself, constantly exploring new territory. It's really, really cool to see how his work has evolved over the years, and we are so excited that 1 year ago he decided to make Barcelona his new home. So please welcome Steve Balderson to the Metropolitan Culture Corner and to Barcelona. So welcome to the Metropolitan Culture Corner. Thank you for being here with us today. So now I want to start at the beginning because I know you live in Barcelona now, but you grew up in Kansas, later went to New York with your family and attended Manhattan School of the Arts, which would be a big change of scenery from Kansas. So was that intimidating or did it feel like finding your people?
I don't know if I was aware of how odd I was until I got older. I think I lived in a little bit of a bubble kind of, and well into my 20s before I realized that I had been a very odd child, and I started making visual art and movies when I was a kid. My grandfather gave me his big camcorder, that I could put like a VHS tape or Betacam tape and like run around, and I bossed all the neighborhood children and sort of directed movies that I cannot wait to digitize and put online because they're terrible. But I was going to film festivals, which were not film festivals. They were like at the one in New York or the one wherever. And we were sophomores in high school, and we were just showing our product that we had made, our movie, in that other high school. And there were maybe, 10 students in the audience from that school. Right. And we all went and we showed it. And then, I went back to Kansas thinking, well, where are we going to go next? I had traveled abroad. My grandparents took me to London when I was 11. So I was aware of there being an outside world. And I was very lucky to see all kinds of different cultures and art at such an early age that when I then went back to Kansas didn't seem limiting to me.
So even though you grew up in Kansas, when you went to New York, you already felt like you'd seen enough of the world to feel like it wasn't a big scary culture shock to go into a bigger city or a different environment?
I remember being a little culture shocked with Times Square because I think we were staying at one of the hotels on Times Square.
I think everybody's culture shocked with Times Square though, yeah.
Yeah, so that was a little bit of a thing, and that was intense. But I liked other artists. There weren't that many in Kansas. I had some friends, but it was a small pool of people who like to create and do creative things. And yes, the more I met creative people, the more I knew that's where it felt for me to be at home.
It sounds like your grandfather was a big influence too, in terms of expanding your worldview when you were little.
Yes, and very supportive parents. Like my whole family, just in general, we're all entrepreneurial. We're all travelers. We all appreciate things about different parts of the big world that we live in, as well as family and each other and supporting each other. So very, very lucky to grow up in that kind of environment.
And then later when you went to California to study at the California Institute of Technology of the Arts, your education was not exactly traditional, so to speak, right? You didn't graduate, you were studying privately. Rather than me trying to explain it, what happened there? And then after you left, why the decision to come back to Kansas?
When I was at Cal Arts, I would do things that I didn't know you weren't supposed to do. So if, for instance, the assignment was go make a short film on texture where you're like showing like the wall behind me for 10 minutes. I don't know, whatever you do. I went off and made a feature version of Anne Rice's The Vampire Lestat, which was terrible, but it was like 3.5 hours long. And I went back to my school and I went to my teacher at Cal Arts and I handed him a double stacked VHS sort of box set because it was so long it couldn't fit on one VHS.
That's awesome.
And that was my answer to the assignment. And I had been gone for 6 weeks. He said, where have you been? You haven't been in class. I was doing the assignment. They didn't know what to do with me, is essentially the bottom line. So after your first 2 years there, you get like a mid-residency review. The faculty review you and either kick you out or tell you what you need to work on. And I didn't have one.
Okay.
So I went to my dean of the school and I said, why didn't I have one? And he said, people in the master's program don't get them. And I told him, well, I'm an undergrad. And he was so confused because I had been evaluated as if I were in the master's program at CalArts.
How did that happen?
I think it's because of the confusion of me doing what I was doing and not doing the work that was assigned. And I was like going above and beyond. So they just, I don't know, it was a total miscommunication. But he said, okay, stop going to all of your courses and just come see me once a week to do an independent study, one-on-one. So
but they couldn't like check the records and see like where you were enrolled or something?
I don't know. It's a weird school.
Okay. Okay.
And his name was Hartmut Batomsky, and he was amazing. I've always tried to find him all these years later, and I have never found him to say thank you, because what he did was he ran like the Alfred Hitchcock something in Europe. I don't remember even where he was from. I would go into his office on a Monday and he would hand me a stack of Hitchcock films, 3 or 4. And he would say, go home and analyze these and bring your report to me on Friday. I would do an analysis and a whole thing for each movie and floor plans for all the shots and where the cameras were. And we did this for months. Every week I would have another set of Hitchcock films. And then at some point into that, it was April of 1996, April 23rd, I woke up, and it was weird because I had been sort of anticipating this day every year, thinking, whose birthday is on April 23rd? And of course, there was no one's. But on April 23rd, I woke up and I sat down and I wrote the script for what would be my first film. And I decided to leave, and I didn't tell anyone. And so I just left CalArts. I did tell one professor, his name was Eric Sherman, and he became sort of my consultant mentor throughout the process of my early career, getting my first couple of films made.
But why did you decide to leave if it sounded like you had this amazing mentor there who was helping you?
I was ready to make a movie. I had gotten to the point of being no longer interested in talking about it, but rather I just wanted to do it. I sat down and I wrote this story, and I went home and I made a business plan and I raised the money and I made the movie. And then that film premiered in Cannes in 1998 and then was licensed around the globe.
But that's not something that just like happens. Like, oh, and it premiered in Cannes, like as if a plant grows out of the crack in cement because there was a little bit of water and some light. Like, how did you get from making a film, Pep Squad was your first film in Kansas, to getting it premiered at Cannes and then getting it licensed around the world? How did that happen?
It's all synchronicity. I don't like using the word coincidence because I don't believe in coincidence. I believe in synchronicity. Eric Sherman, my mentor from CalArts, my professor, had been college roommates at Yale with Lloyd Kaufman and Oliver Stone. So Eric said, I'm going to show this to Lloyd, who at the time, he was head of some big film thing. I don't remember what it was. He may have been on the Cannes board at one point in his career. He had these slots of screening times open at the market. It was a big place where all the buyers from around the world go. And he said, how about I'm your sales agent at Cannes to license this thing? Because he really liked it. So that's how we got from Kansas to Cannes.
That's actually a very good, like a t-shirt, you know?
Totally.
Okay, so you're there at Cannes. How old are you at the time?
22.
So basically you came of age in the 90s, right?
That's right.
This is a particular time in American pop culture for music, for film. There was this kind of optimism that spilled over from the 80s, but there was also this kind of angst after all the bubbles burst and stuff leading up to the Y2K era. Did you feel like becoming an adult in that era really influenced this first, well, of course it influenced the first film you made, but how do you feel like coming of age in that era really influenced the aesthetic of your first film and the kinds of stories you wanted to tell, especially with this first film?
I think it influenced most the behavior and the outlook that I had on life, being a little rebellious, being a little, well, I'm just going to go do that, because that's sort of what people were doing in the 90s. I mean, the films we would see were sort of made in a way, like they just took the cameras and they went and made them. It wasn't the first indie movie era, because, you know, the people have been making indie movies for decades, but it was a certain type of methodology and just way of being, a total mindset. And I think that's the biggest influence, which has then still carried with me.
That's an interesting point, because you feel like the people who came before you and after you, those generations of filmmakers, don't have that particular mindset.
Yeah. The ones in the 90s had all sorts of similar, even if the stories and products they were making were different, it was still sort of that guerrilla something that I can't articulate.
Like, I'm just going to do it.
Yeah.
And see how it goes. Yeah. Your second movie, Firecracker, was set in the 1950s and had included a traveling carnival. I just think it's really interesting, this concept of the Pep Squad, the traveling carnival, Casserole Club later was set against the 1969 moon landing. There's all this like campy Americana kitsch classic imagery, you know? This nostalgia as this backdrop to a lot of your stories of these very complex characters who often have these dark, complicated relationships with all this trauma. What is it about this kind of like shiny, sparkly, brightly colored rose-colored Americana nostalgia that makes it a good backdrop for these very quirky, kind of damaged characters that you seem to be drawn to slaying?
This is a two-part answer. One is growing up in Kansas, where everyone has that smile. It's like like the smile. It's so fake, right? And I feel like the muscles in my face hurt. And at the end of the day, I just imagine them getting home and it just drops. And that's when the truth comes out. And all that stuff that they've just shoved under the carpet, pretending is great, finally is revealed. I saw that enough with what was really going on at the house down the street or with the family that lives up the road that's seemingly perfect. Enough to just be obsessed with that concept and then let my imagination run wild. The other part was my mother watched a show called Dynasty. And I was very, very young. And I remember going in and as a small person, which is hard to believe that I was ever small, but I would lay on the edge of her bed and I'm just watching this show that I should not have been watching. And there was what would be known as the cliffhanger. That was the Moldavian wedding massacre, where these people fly in through the cathedral and then literally machine gun down the entire cast of this TV show because all of their contracts were up for renewal. So we didn't know who was going to live or who was going to die. But that was so melodramatically over the top that I was hooked instantly. It just seared into my DNA. So it's this combination of a telenovela, campy ridiculousness, and then this really dark underbelly of what's going on behind the scenes that I love to play with that combination.
It resonates with a lot of people, apparently, because it's something that we've seen in different filmmakers' work over time, like David Lynch, for example, in a very different way. But it's interesting how that contrast works so well. Your films often, press critics, the folks who know, often talk about the visual composition of your films, the aesthetics of your films, and the beauty of your films. Do you set out to make beautiful films specifically in order to highlight or underline that contrast even more of the dark subject matter, or is it just that you happen to have a good eye?
Thank you. I think it's the composition. I storyboard almost everything. So when I'm thinking of, here's the canvas and the balance of that image, I'm thinking about that for every single shot, even if it's something that's in passing or the lamp needs to be in a certain place and that shadow and that light. But it just naturally happens. And when it feels off balance, that's when I get in there and start fiddling around with what's going on in the background or where the person's standing to make it so it feels in tune with whatever else is going on. And I do this in all of my movies, even if the tone and the style of each is sometimes very different. Sometimes it's really glossy and pretty, like the camera lens and the choices. Sometimes it's a little gritty and sometimes it's not so pretty, but the composition is still there, if that makes sense.
Is that a Hitchcock thing? Because he was known for his compositions.
Could be. And because I was so ingrained in that during my studies, I think it forces me to treat the making of a movie, because that's how he did it. He always did storyboards. And I just thought that's how you did it. Sometimes people don't do that.
That's really interesting. All these different influences that come together to make a particular person's style, right?
Yeah.
Speaking of the concept of things coming together, the U.S. Library of Congress had included one of your films, I think it was from 2010, The Casserole Club in its permanent collection, which if people who are watching this don't know, that's a big honor because their selection of media, music, films, recordings, is supposed to be representative of the cultural zeitgeist, so to speak. Pieces of media that really represent the moment that is happening now in America. So when that happened, it would be difficult not to be delighted by that, I would hope. And it's a big honor, and so congratulations. But did you feel like, okay, yes, this makes sense because I was always aiming to tell the story of the voice of my generation. This is what I was aiming for. Or you just tell the stories that appeal to you and it just happened to represent something that was going on at the time?
I think it was an accident because when I got the call, they first asked me for the film print. But that was, I think, the second or third film that I made using HD. Because film was becoming prohibitive, at least cost-wise. And I didn't have a film print. But I panicked. I thought, oh shit, we're gonna have to either get one made. And they said, oh no, any format is fine. It can be digital because all it is they're preserving it in the record. Oh, thank God. So then I was able to get around that. And then I called a friend of mine who knows about these things. She's an author. And I think maybe one of her books at some point was also in the US Library of Congress. And she told me what it means. And because I didn't know about it. It was very cool. But I think on any project, I tried to stay true to it while I'm in it without necessarily thinking about whether or not it will be liked or whether it will have success or who will see it. Nowadays, I'm a little bit smarter in that regard. We should know who's going to see it before we spend the money and make it in order to make the money back. But a lot of the first half of my career was spent just being an artist for the sake of making the art for itself.
Has the change of perspective as far as thinking of the audience, maybe not necessarily first, but thinking of it as a component, who are we going to sell this to? Is that a perspective that's also changed as technology's evolved? Because now streaming platforms make the way that people view films very different than when people had to go to a theater to see them. Do you feel like that's just been only an evolution of yourself as a businessman, or as well as evolution of yourself as a tech-savvy person in this tech world?
I think with the exception of 2 or 3 of my movies, none of them were necessarily meant to be seen in a theater.
Okay, how?
I mean, maybe. This is a great question because I haven't really thought about that. Firecracker was in cinemas. Watch Out had a small theatrical run, and there were some others, but the primary method by which my movies have been released globally has been either at first home video, VHS and DVD, or then streaming. So even when I'm doing the composition, I'm well aware of, if you have like a CinemaScope frame, which is like 2.35 to 1, and you put that on a TV at home, you're really far away from those people unless you've got a really big TV.
Right.
And everything you need to see is in the eyes of the characters. So then when I move to 16:9 as a frame or 2:1 as a frame, then you're closer to the face of the characters on your TV. And so I was consciously thinking of that, being closer to the people in the movie so the audience could relate to them more. Yeah, you can see a CinemaScope, a widescreen thing in a theater and feel as close to them as you would otherwise in real life. But at home, that could hurt the viewing experience because people may not connect with the characters if they're further away from them.
So you thought of this while you were framing your shots, that this is going to be watched on a TV rather than in a cinema?
Well, I would pick the framing. Before each movie, I would say, should this one be widescreen or not? Yeah.
I don't think people think about that kind of thing, how the framing might affect the emotional impact of the storytelling. There's so much that goes into filmmaking. Is there other stuff that goes into your particular brand of filmmaking? By stuff, I mean this kind of thing, the framing, the shots, the color, that you feel is really key to getting your messages across or your storytelling across that maybe people wouldn't know if they weren't you or weren't in your shoes?
I think that all of the steps that go into producing a movie or a record or any of these things that have so many technical steps and parts to it that the most ordinary civilian who's just listening to the music or watching the movie for enjoyment has no idea what really goes into all the different layers. Everything from the pre-production and the costuming and which lamp is it going to be that I'm going to fiddle with in the background, which lampshade is it? I mean, every little detail. And then when you're doing it and you're making it, there's a whole new set of just making sure it's captured. And then in post-production, you can change all of it. The color of the lighting, you can give it more of an orange glow or a blue glow or whatever,
With technology post-production, you mean?
In post-production. Then you have a sound design. I love playing with sound design. I had a character in one movie who was sort of mysterious, and when it came time to do the Foley, they do like the feet steps in the room separately than the actual recording of the feet. So you have to add in all of these sounds. And I made it so that she didn't have any Foley. So it would be this really weird, unconscious etherealness, whereas everyone else in the movie had Foley, except this one.
Movements had sound and hers did not.
That's right.
See, but these are the things that if you don't make movies, maybe you're not aware of at all. But that was an intention to create like a sense of eeriness about this character.
That's right. It's an unconscious thing. I don't think many people are conscious of the fact, I can't hear her walking across the floor. They just don't hear her walking across the floor. They don't think about it. But I think it influences the experience.
In the same way that a lampshade in the background might seem like a detail, but if it's a bright green lampshade against a black background or against a white background or pink on pink or whatever, it says one thing or another, right?
Yeah.
Creates a mood. But going back to sound, I know that you're a music fan. So what role does music play in your filmmaking process, if any? I know, of course, you can commission a score after you've made a film, but does music play a role in the actual creation of the films that you make?
Sometimes. And one time it was really dangerous because I fell in love with this piece of music that I had designed the entire scene around. It was a public domain song. It was an old classical orchestra thing. But when it came time to try to find a recording that I could afford to license of that song, it took forever because, of course, I couldn't afford the whatever Philharmonic. So I had to find, and I think the person who did some original score for that particular film found it some orchestra in I don't know where, somewhere you would never look. The sound and the quality of the recording was great.
What film was this?
This was an Alchemy of the Spirit. It was like the climactic moment. And I was so tied to it emotionally, but I've also learned to not do that. So it's like if I'm going to sit down and create and design a whole sequence based around whatever song it is, to the beat and to the rhythm. I did a class at CalArts called jazz editing, where it taught you how to think of the rhythm of a scene and the cuts as music. So I've always sort of thought, well, if I put this set with that exact rhythm, it's going to have to be the same rhythm. It can be a different song, but if the rhythm changes, then I have to recut the scene.
Right.
So it's really, really dangerous to use music that you don't have the rights for, because then when it comes time to get the rights, you're going to have to change the music.
Well, that's a really good don't do this, kids example. I know you've guest lectured at CalArts, so are there any other don't do this, kids examples that you would say to young filmmakers? Or definitely do this?
Well, if you're going to design something based around the song, get the song first.
Well, that, yes.
Right. If you use work music while you're editing, that's not going to be what you're going to use later. Use stuff that's either nondescript or for sure in public domain, because you can always find a similar rhythm, a similar tone. And the person who's composing the movie may want to do something totally original, and they may hear something as a musical artist that matches the rhythm. Like when I did Pep Squad, Johnette Napolitano from Concrete Blonde scored it, and I didn't know what she was going to send me, but I did have some work music in there of songs, and what then she would deliver, it was just her version of what she heard, because she said when she first watched the movie, she watched it on mute. She just wanted to see it and then hear whatever came to her herself, and that's what then she scored. And I've had other musicians do something similar. Music's an incredibly important part of filmmaking, as is sound design. I think music and sound are almost more important than how it looks. Almost. Because I think that the brain, when it's looking at a crazy, disjointed image, as long as it sounds perfect, it's like you forgive the mistakes. Whereas if it's a pristine, visually perfect image and it sounds terrible, it's hard to get around that.
That's interesting.
So I would say the other one is make sure your production recording of all the dialogue, when you're actually filming is good, because you'll either have to redo it. The ADR, this is when you've made your movie and then the sound recording from the shoot was not so good. So you have to get the actor back into the studio to say their lines again and match their lips and everything. I've never had to do that because I was aware of always making sure that while you're recording it, there's no horn honking or train passing through the background or whatever the case may be.
Those are good tips, because I think these are the things that you learn by accidentally having done them wrong the first time type thing.
That's right.
That's why I wanted to know if you could share your wisdom so that people will maybe hopefully avoid these mistakes. But aside from being a filmmaker, you also do a bunch of other things. Feature films, but you've also made music videos. You've written articles, books, you host a podcast, you've produced radio plays, you've done voiceovers. Was branching out into all these other things, was as a result of intellectual curiosity or economic necessity or opportunity, or just a combination of all three?
Curiosity mainly, and having an opportunity. For instance, when I was asked to narrate this guy's book for Audible, I was like, oh, I've never done that. How interesting. I love listening to audiobooks. I would have never imagined that I would ever do that. So I said, sure. And it was terrifying because I didn't know what I was doing. I had no idea, but I had listened to enough of them that I thought, well, I'm just going to read this in the style by which I would want to listen to it. And that's all I did. I don't know whether it was good, but it worked for him. When I decided to write my first book, it came out of, I've got a lot of stories that I think can help a lot of aspiring filmmakers not make the same mistakes, or at least help encourage them in the ways that would make it possible to make their films. One of them is finding investors, and I've written a whole separate book on this. I think over the course of 25 years, I've learned some things that I wish I would have known. And that's sort of a motivation for me to share. I want to genuinely help, and I get really, really excited when I'm teaching a masterclass or a workshop to people who genuinely want to know this information. I find it a different kind of fulfilling. Making films is fulfilling, but sharing that with people of any age to then go make their movies, make their projects, it feels great to help people. The different formats, whether it's a music video or a commercial, I want to do a children's animated Disney style show too. I haven't done one, so I want to try it. I think that's part of it too. It's if I haven't done something and it's either presented to me or I say, well, I would like to try, what is that about? People seem to enjoy working in that field. I wonder what it's like. I want to go explore that just to see if it's interesting. It probably always is interesting, but whether or not it speaks to me as something I should continue is a totally different thing.
Hearing you talk is fun because you just seem excited about life and about your work and about discovering new things, and you've been doing this for quite a long time. So would you say that's the key to doing good work, whether it's a film, a podcast, an interview, an article, just constant curiosity and being open and looking for new things all the time?
Yes. In fact, my first book was published during the pandemic and I couldn't do any kind of book reading or any kind of book tour. So that's when I did this podcast. And I thought, well, the only way I'm going to be able to promote it is by interviewing other artists and writers and musicians and things and filmmakers. And what I learned was that I had a genuine curiosity about other people. I loved being a journalist. I had no idea that was even in me. So these conversations that I would have with people were really inspiring for me to learn that there is a part of myself that never knew I actually had this other another interest and a curiosity about another person's story. Because everybody has one, and it's finding what is theirs, trying to get to that. And I think that's really fun. It's a constant curiosity. I've tried to keep that feeling that I've had since I was a little boy, playing, where there were no rules and there were no restraints, and you could just imagine and you could be flying in your mind, You could go into the backyard, and I would entertain myself with little Star Wars figurines to try to keep that going every day, no matter what it is you're doing. Just makes it so much more interesting and fun and enjoyable than really any other way to do it, for me at least.
And that's been a life philosophy for you.
Yeah.
I feel like you can see it in your work. That's really cool. Well, thank you so much for being here. This was a pleasure, really. Yeah, welcome to Barcelona and good luck.
Thank you. Can't wait to talk to you again. Cheers.
Thank you so much for spending time with us here on the Metropolitan Culture Corner, and I, for one, am looking forward to seeing what your next projects will be in Barcelona and all over the world. Speaking of projects, tune in next month to the Metropolitan Culture Corner. Same time, same channel. The first Monday of every month, we go behind the scenes with one of the fascinating figures from the local world of arts and culture here in Barcelona. See you next month. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for supporting what we do. We could not do it without you. And as always, if there's someone that you would like to see on the Metropolitan Culture Corner, you are free to leave their name in the comments below. We will be happy to hear your feedback. We always want to know what's going on in our city.